The subject of selling the house having been discussed in the past now elevated to a higher level of consideration. A third-party involvement was necessitated if the plan would come to fruition. Gary and Jan, friends with the Ott brothers, both whom were in Jan's high school class of '69. Brad, a vice president at the Bank of Kiowa, his wife Deb, a realty agent being approached about marketing the Wilsons' house. The 5 years of Wilson ownership of the Roth family heirloom on North 11th Street having marked improvement to the once unlivable structure. The 2-story aperture with a new roof, an outside facial coat of paint, every room wall acquainted with a new acrylic covering, an application of central heat installed. The lowering of the downstairs living and dining room ceiling to an acceptable 8 feet, the yard enhanced with fencing, and the installation of a triple-wall chimney wood-burning stove. Gary, realizing the time and cost invested in the improvements, suggesting an asking price twice his $7,500 acquisition amount, Deb agreeing to the amelioration and would start the solicitation. Joe Potter and his wife Judy finding an interest in the Kiowa property, Judy employed as a dietary person at the middle school in Hartna, Joe a past custodian driver for the school. Deb Ott entertaining their application, representing both the buyer and seller at the Farmers Home Administration office in Medicine Lodge. Gary soon discovering it was more arduous to sell a house than to purchase one. Among the inspection requirements, an inspection by a licensed certified electrician to sign off on the electrical status of the dwelling. Gary making an attempt to find a local state-certified electrician. Deciding on another avenue, addressing the City of Kiowa electrical engineer Ed Maddox about inspecting the house and filling out the paperwork for the sale approval. Gary mentioning that it needed to be done by a licensed certified electrician, and he would be more than happy to compensate Ed for his time, but again another astonishment. Ed was not licensed by the state. Gary was stymied, not wanting to endeavor someone he didn't know from Medicine Lodge to inspect the wiring. There was always the possibility that the 60-year structure wouldn't meet a strict interpretation of the requirements and would incur a multitude of expense. Once again deciding on another tact, meeting with Ed at his makeshift office in the ancient Brick City garage, asking if he would at least take a look at the residence to see if there was something outstanding that needed corrected. Ed agreeing to do a walkthrough. The two proceeded, Gary noting that with all the years of wiring changes, knob and tube, Romex, and conduit, he felt like a tour guide in a museum displaying the turn-of-the-century electrical wiring. Their walkthrough completed, Ed not finding anything outstanding except the multiple types of wiring. With Ed's departure, Gary sitting at his typewriter, composing an official-looking document stating the residence was concurrent with the FMHA requirement, adding a footnote stating, "At the time of installation all wiring in the residence complied with existing electrical codes." Below the bottom signature line, Gary typed, "Kiowa City Electrical Engineer." Ed didn't hesitate in fulfilling his signature to the document, or accepting a token compensation. The FMHA also in acceptance. Just when Gary thought everything was copacetic, Deb announced there were problems with the sale and with the Potters' loan approval. The Farmers Home Administration in Medicine Lodge finding an additional compulsion, a newly formulated federal statute to meet loan requirements. The residents had to comply with a storm window provision. The antiquated screens on all the windows was no longer acceptable. Gary telling Deb about a similar problem when applying for loan to buy the house. The FMHA refusing because the house did not meet requirements, but agreeing if Gary borrowed another $2,000 to bring it up to their standards. Gary asking Deb to mitigate with the FMHA. The Wilsons would reduce their selling price to cover the cost of the storm window expenditures, if the Potters would agree to the installation after the sale. Again all seemed well until another resolution came about. The Potters were required for the acquisition of their loan to post a 1-year housing insurance premium. Visiting with Joe Potter, discovering they were without the financial resources for the required insurance provision. Plus Joe mentioned a concern about the utilities deposit. Gary was resolute in concluding the sale, even if it meant his financial involvement, issuing a personal check for the Potter's insurance and agreeing to leave the utilities in his name for the first month. With the sale completed, a very familiar 3-bedroom house at 611 Dickinson Street was a rental. The North 11th Street house they were leaving being the old Roth family home place. The Dickinson house also having a Roth identity. It had been the home of Jen's grandmother, Martha Roth, her town residence upon descending from the farm. The moving experience beginning, the furniture and household goods discovering a new home. The kills and accumulation of countless molds finding storage at the Murrow residence. The satellite dish once again installed on a roof-mounted platform, being a rental, Gary's father-in-law Bud providing the Dickinson Street platform, Gary well adept at aligning the dish for satellite acquisition. The new residency providing a solace of confection. No longer having to rely on an accumulation of firewood to supplement the heat or the covering of the north windows with plastic to restrict Chuck Payne's open field winter wind. Jan no longer having to hang clothes on a clothesline, the rental house having a 240-volt outlet for a dryer. The fact that the North 11th Street residence resided with open pasture on two sides, moving into the Dickinson Street house was like moving from the farm into town.